So we are recording and we're ready to go.
Great. Welcome, everyone, to the November 17th, 2025 meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Committee. My name is Alec Militic, and I am the chair of the committee. Tonight, we are joined by Community Coordinator Brian Lafferty. This meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. As a reminder, New York State law requires all committee members who are not able to attend the meeting in person to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. Members of the public who are attending virtually, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature on Zoom. Members of the public who are here in person, you can raise any questions that you have by raising your hand. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. We will need a volunteer to take minutes tonight. Do I see any volunteers? Thank you, Liz, for taking the meeting minutes last month. I appreciate that.
Sorry for the delay.
Thanks. Thank you, Will. We will now take attendance by roll call. Brian will conduct the roll call.
Thanks, Alec. Committee members, I'll call your name. When your name is called, please say present. I'll announce if there's quorum. Kyle Assad. I know who's planning to join us virtually. I don't see him yet. Lisper.
Here.
Thank you. Eric Goldberg. If he is planning to join us, but I don't see him yet. Sandra Leftoff.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alec Militant.
Present.
Thank you. Rich Mintz.
Present.
Thank you. Will Perry.
Present.
Thank you. James Vera is not joining us this evening. Jerry Weinstein. Here. Thank you. David Woods is not joining us this evening. Shuya Zhao.
Present.
Thank you.
Kyle.
There's 7 present. Oh, and Kyle is here as well, I see.
Yep, present.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.
Okay, so with 8 of 11 members present, we have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, Brian. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is reflected on the screen before you momentarily. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you would object to adopting the agenda, please raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the September 15th, 2025 meeting are under review. When they are ready, they will be shared with the committee members for their review. I'm going to set some ground rules in order to conduct an efficient meeting. We're going to observe the following ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members who are here in person, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand and I will identify you so you may speak. Committee members unable to attend in person, if you have a question about committee business, you may raise your hand through Zoom and I will identify you so that you may speak. All committee members, it is extremely important that only one person speak at a time so that members of the public watching at home can understand what is being said by each committee member. I will also note that the speaker picks up even the smallest, quietest sound. So it's very important to speak clearly. The chat function for committee members present via Zoom should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information such as an email address that was already stated aloud on the recording during the meeting. And so with that, I think we can get into tonight's agenda. So at the September committee meeting, we polled the members of the committee about topics that they are interested in and would like to learn more about this year. One of which was relating to homelessness, and I think the intersection of homelessness and housing, best practices and just getting a general feel of more information about this important issue. With that, I reached out to Coalition for the Homeless. Actually, earlier this year, I believe sometime, maybe it was late summer or fall. And they agreed to present and speak before this committee this evening. So we're really excited to have Coalition for the Homeless in attendance tonight to present some information and their work and to field and take questions from us. So with that, I will pass it over to the Coalition for the Homeless members so that you may present. Thank you for attending this evening.
Oh, great. Thank you for having us. We're excited to speak with you all about the issue of housing and homelessness and talk to you a little bit about some of the work that we're doing and kind of some of the ways that we see this issue and how it lands and ways that the city could do more to address housing and homelessness. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex to get us started to talk more or first about the housing situation in New York City and how we've come to this crisis of mass homelessness.
Hi, everybody. Everybody can hear me and everybody can see the screens. Yeah, awesome.
Yes.
My name is Alex. My pronouns are he or they. I'm a campaign coordinator at Coalition for the Homeless, and I work with Allison on topics of homelessness. And one of our campaigns surrounds affordable housing as a method to end mass homelessness in New York City. But before we really get into affordable housing, we're going to talk a little bit about homelessness in general as it relates to New York City. And I really want to paint a picture to describe the scale of the crisis that New York City is currently experiencing, particularly the shelters. So we estimate approximately 350,000 New Yorkers are without homes on any given night. And if you look here at the graphic, you can see where we break that down. The last HOPE survey, which is a point in time count of people who are experiencing homelessness outside of shelters, we call them unsheltered homelessness or the unsheltered homeless. It happens about once a year, and it isn't the best estimate, but it is a pretty good rough estimate to understand what the unsheltered homeless population looks like. This year, it was approximately 4,000 people. DHS shelter census, along with other shelter census that get updated, I believe on a monthly basis. We're able to tell how many people are in shelters on a given night. So as of October 2025, an estimated, and it's an estimation because there's a bit of averaging going on here, of 103,391 individuals residing in shelters in any given night on October 2025. Over 100,000 people. It's a pretty large number. And then this last number right here is the estimated people who are sleeping doubled up or tripled up, which is in most cases really isn't counted in the definition of homelessness. But when we think about homelessness and we think about the shelter, we think about the people who are going in, we think the people who are residing, and we think about the people who are going out, because this is really a tenuous time. We have people who are on the brink of homelessness, people who are homeless. And then when you exit shelter, you kind of enter this brink of homelessness again because you're really starting to get your life started up again. And unfortunately, going back into shelter is a bit common. So we really take these numbers into consideration when thinking about the scale of the crisis. To continue that explanation about the scale, here is a bar chart of the average number of people sleeping each night in the DHS and HPD shelters for any given month between 1985 and 2025. So as we can see here, the shelter population per night on average has increased, meaning more and more people are inside a shelter per night as the years goes on. A lot of this, of course, can be explained by population growth, but the one thing I want to bring to your attention is this big dip right here, which was the pandemic. So during the pandemic, there was a rent moratorium and there were extra vouchers put into the system so that way people could be prevented from going into the shelters, and those who are in the shelters could be put into permanent housing. So what ended up as a result, um, due to the pandemic, was that more people were experiencing stable housing. And we think this is a really good explanation as to, or a really good example for our theory that permanent housing, permanent supportive housing, really is a solution to ending mass homelessness. And so when we think about homelessness and when we think about people entering into the shelter and people exiting the shelter, of course, we acknowledge that permanent housing really is a solution. But one, is that a question I hear? No? Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. Probably maybe some just feedback on my time, on my side. One aspect, or one solution, pardon me, to ending mass homelessness is affordable housing. And so when we look at affordable housing and when we look at the type of rents that are occurring in New York City, we take rent burden and affordable housing into consideration. So pardon me, before I get into affordable housing, we're really going to drill into rent burden right here. So when we look at rent burden, when we look at the supply of apartments in New York, we really see that the development of housing doesn't match the need of, or doesn't match the need of the city and the need of everyday New Yorkers. So this graph right here is from our good friends at ANHD, and they did an analysis of the most recent housing and vacancy survey, which describes the state of rentals and apartments and how much the rents are, and in general, the demographics of the people who are currently renting in New York City. It's a really great wealth of information for us to understand how people are renting, where the rents are, and as you can see right here, who is facing rent burden. So to be rent burden is to pay more than 30% of your gross income. And we do that, you take your gross income, times it by 0.3, and then divide it by 12. That is the max amount of rent you should be paying per month, to be considered, to have what we consider like stable finances, and that's below 30% of your income. And so when we take that into consideration, we see here that only 7% of the vacant units on the market have a rent of less than $1,100 a month. 1,100 a month is an interesting number. I want you to keep it in mind, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. So 7% of the vacant units in this income area, 65% of rent burden tenants need rents that low. So I know it's a little bit of a wonky wording right here, but what it's mostly describing is that the people who need the cheapest amount of rent are also the ones who are the most rent burden. 65% of New Yorkers who are in the extremely low income category, those are people that is a single person making approximately 35,000 or less, or a family of three making around 53K or less. 65% of those renters pay more than 30% of their income towards rent. In terms of economics, that's a big indication about who might be entering into shelter. And that way that works in practice is it only takes one bad medical bill. If you're paying more than 30% of your rent, it only maybe takes one bad medical bill. It takes one life event. It takes one, you know what I mean? One child becoming disabled. One life event really could make or break the situation. And so as we dig in a little bit deeper, we wanted to understand how so that is housing that is partially funded by HPD, and mostly that you can find on Housing Connect, amongst other resources, how affordable housing could be used to help those who are on the brink of homelessness and who are also in shelter. We looked at rent burden, and we looked at the rate of the population of shelter to kind of understand the crisis of to understand the scale of what is needed. And we also look at the area median income. So I know I'm probably speaking to a knowledge crowd right here, but just bear with me. The area median income is a model derived by HUD at the federal level, and it is applied to the New York City metropolitan area. So parts of that include New Jersey, include Staten Island and Long Island. They average the median incomes, they throw households on these scales, and they determine who's considered extremely low income up to middle income. These numbers also determined what type of housing and how much you pay if you apply for affordable housing through Housing Connect. So for example, if you're extremely low income, your max income for a 3-person household is about 43,000. I think in the last slide I said 53, so pardon me. It's about 43,000. And to have affordable rent, that is not to pay more than 30% of your income, your rent should land around $1,000. We saw in the last slide that only 7% of the vacant units in New York City rent below $1,100 a month. But 65% of individuals who are extremely low income need that rent. That means 65% of individuals who are renting are rent burdened. That means the majority of extremely low income individuals in New York who are renting are rent burdened. That means that they are more on the like to enter into shelter. I'll pause right here so everybody can kind of look at the numbers and maybe identify yourself on these numbers somewhere. If you can't identify yourself somewhere on these numbers, I want your job. Joking. But it gives you a sense of how the city really thinks about the income bands and what's needed in the city in terms of affordability. So for instance, a middle income household, so that's a family of 3, makes about $240,000, and they can afford a rent in theory of about $6,000 a month, which is a large scale away from, of course, $1,000 a month. And so when we throw that on how many affordable units have actually started, we call them affordable unit starts. So these are how many units are in the pipeline to start development. I believe they're called starts somewhere around the financing point. So it's a really good indication of what's about to start within that year. As you can see right here, and these colors correspond with the income bands that we saw earlier. Extremely low income is this lovely mustard color, and the middle income units are these kind of beige colors. I hope it doesn't blend too much into the background. But as we can see right here, the affordable housing unit construction in the city from 2015 to 2024 doesn't appear to really match the numbers that we were looking at in the past couple slides, meaning that it doesn't look like we are matching the need for what the city need or for what the individuals in New York need, particularly our extremely low income neighbors. We're going to take one step forward. Let's look at 2024, for example. We see that 43% of all the affordable unit starts were made affordable for middle income households. A couple slides ago, we saw that the AMI for a middle income household for a family of 3 is about $240,000, and that the lowest rent that these middle income units will rent for is approximately $6,000, a little bit less. When we take this into consideration on the needs of the city, and also taking into consideration that all of these units right here are being funded through taxpayer money, among some other incentives, it really kind of begs the question on who the affordable housing is for. And when we think about affordable housing as a pipeline into homelessness, we also want to think about it as a way out of homelessness. And so we have been, oh, pardon me, I forgot about this. One other aspect of the affordable housing program are the homeless set-aside units. So we were talking before about deeply affordable units. Those are units that are below $11,000. We want to see a lot more of those being developed, and we want the city to invest in a lot more of those units. We also want the city to invest in homeless set-aside units. So a couple of years ago, the coalition took part in helping pass a piece of legislation that established 15% of all units that get HPD funding are to be used for are to be established as homeless set-aside units, and they are meant for people who are residing in DHS shelter. So when they do apply for those, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, they are income restricted at 30% of whatever the resident is making. And then they also get a supply of like supportive resources like caseworkers and some other types of management. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the homeless set-aside units are like other HPD financed affordable housing, and that the tenants in rent is limited to 30% of their income. These units are just for people who are residing in shelter and get accessed that way through shelter. But as you can see here, and as I'm sure Alex was about to say, you can see that the numbers, and we have both starts, meaning units financed and units completed for FY23 and FY24. You can see that those numbers don't match the need that we described in the first slide with having over 100,000 people living in shelter. And we are, producing less than 2,000 homeless set-aside units per year.
And so when we look at these numbers, we believe that by increasing the amount of homeless set-aside units and by further investing in affordable housing that aims at deeply affordable units, so those are units that are priced at below 30% AMI and below, we can help create an opportunity to decrease the flow of individuals into the shelter and also increase the flow of individuals exiting the shelter. And exactly. And so at the end of this, or at the center of a lot of what we do at the Coalition for the Homeless, and particularly for this campaign that we are starting up, we really drive with the idea that solution to homelessness is housing, creating more permanently affordable housing for people who are homeless now and for extremely low people who are about to become homeless. Yes, pardon me, for who are about to become homeless. And I believe that next slide is going to Allison. So at this moment, I'm going to take a pause and maybe for any questions on the affordable housing side, or do you want to jump right into it, Allison?
Yeah, maybe we should save questions for the end, and I can talk a bit about unsheltered homelessness first.
Awesome. So I just talked about affordable housing, talking about stemming the flow of increasing the amount of the shelter population by decreasing the amount of people who go in and trying to increase the amount of people who go out. Allison is going to take it over, talking about involuntary shelterlessness and the unsheltered homeless.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I think, as Alex said earlier, the city annually does what they call the Hope Count. And as of last year, they counted over 4,000 people who were sleeping in public spaces. We do think that that Hope Count is a significant undercount because there's some methodological issues with how they perform it. I mean, one, it is performed in January in the coldest months of the year when more people are actually likely to seek shelter instead of being on the streets, as opposed to the warmer months where more people might be choosing to sleep outdoors. But also the way that they conduct it is it's an estimate. So they have people who are out counting the number of unsheltered people. They're given a designated area. But if they see someone who's across the street and that's outside of their designated area, then they do not count that person. So it's only like it's done by, if you're on the right side of the street, you get counted. There've also been efforts over the years to have people go out and maybe dress like they might be someone who is unsheltered and sleeping on the streets, and to try and see if they get counted. And in a lot of cases, people do not get counted. So we do think that it is an undercount, but by how much it is hard to say. But as anyone who's living in New York City knows, we have a lot of people who are sleeping unsheltered. And for a lot of these people, they're folks who have gone into the shelter system and found that what is offered in the shelter system does not meet their needs. And they're voluntarily choosing to sleep on the streets. It's not surprising, given that, especially for single adults, our shelter system has a lot of large buildings where you can have, hundreds of people in one building, and it is dormitory style sleeping. The amount of services provided in shelter is insufficient, and those services, are fairly limited to getting people benefits and hopefully helping people find housing. But we know because of significant understaffing and under budgeting, people aren't actually getting the services that they need. The city does have some what they term mental health shelters, but those shelters provide very little beyond what a regular shelter provides. And so I think people may think that people are getting clinical services in these shelters, but often they are not getting clinical services in mental health shelters. So many people are choosing to sleep unsheltered. The city's approach to unsheltered homelessness over the past few years has been failing, and I think we can all see that as we navigate through the city. There's kind of two big efforts that the city has used, pardon me, that they have ramped up. The first is involuntarily removing people who appear to have a mental health issue. Both the governor and Mayor Adams have tried to increase the number of involuntary removals by loosening the criteria, particularly the criteria by which police can decide that a person has a mental illness and is unable to care for themselves. And the way that that the law now reads in terms of that inability to care for themselves includes an inability to provide shelter for oneself. And so for people who cannot find housing in this expensive city, that can be a reason for police to forcibly remove someone. So because of a law passed by City Council, we know that in 2024, police made the determination to forcibly remove over 1,500 people from streets and subways. But in that reporting, the city is unable to say whether these people were actually admitted to a hospital or received any treatment. And sorry, just to be clear, when I'm saying forcibly removed, they are making a determination that a person needs to be transported to a hospital. So they take someone to the emergency room. I will say that often when these are effectuated, they're effectuated in the same way as an arrest happens. So people are handcuffed, sometimes they are hooded, and they are forcibly taken to the hospital. But the city doesn't even know whether these folks were admitted to the hospital, whether they received any treatment. And so they've been doubling down on a strategy without even knowing what the outcome is. Anecdotally, what we hear is that a lot of people are taken to the hospital. They may be there for a few hours and then they are released. And in fact, Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch recently said to the press that people are given a sandwich and then released from the hospital. So there's been a real doubling down on this approach without any end game. A second approach that the city has used is displacing people by sweeping encampments of folks who are homeless. So from January to September in 2024, New York City displaced about 3,500 people who were homeless. And from those displacements, only 114 people were actually accepted an offer to go to shelter, and 0 people were given an offer of permanent housing. And we know from the data on that over 1,600 of those locations had been previously cleared at least once before. So these encampment sweeps are really just shuffling people around without providing any long-term help or support. So you want to go to the next slide, Alex? So there are solutions that we know that work. One are safe haven beds, which are a low barrier shelter model. So these shelters are different from kind of the larger congregate models in that they make it easier for people to enter shelter. They more typically have a more individual room or pod that people are staying in. And they make it a little easier for people to come and go without losing their bed. This is a model that many people prefer. But there's actually simply not enough of these safe haven beds. So in January, Mayor Adams promised an additional 900 beds on top of what he said were the 4,000 beds that the city already provides. But we have reviewed the data on how many beds there are, and there have never been 4,000 beds. The current capacity at this moment is about 3,700 beds. And in addition to that, the city in September of 2024 changed the eligibility rules for these beds. That makes it harder for people to get into these, what are supposed to be low barrier beds. So now the city is requiring that in order to be eligible for one of these safe haven beds, a person has to have 6 months of documented unsheltered homelessness that has been documented by outreach teams over a period of 6 months. That has made it harder for people to access these beds because there are many unsheltered folks who are never in touch with outreach teams, or people are inconsistently in touch with outreach teams. So I think the city has enacted a really counterproductive policy that is actually just making it harder for people to go inside and access these beds. Another thing that we know works is mental health treatment in the community. So there's kind of two models, assertive community treatment, or ACT, and also intensive mobile treatment, those are IMT. These are mental health teams that someone can get assigned to who has serious chronic mental illness. And the teams provide wraparound care to the person in the community. So the whole idea is that these teams are supposed to come to where someone is, including people who are unsheltered, try and find them on the street where they are. They can provide both clinical services, medication management, and also services to help people find housing. It is a very successful model. It's very well studied. However, in New York City, the wait list for ACT teams as of about a year ago, that's when we last foiled this data, was over 1,400 people long. So people are waiting a long time to be assigned one of these teams. And the same with IMT teams, we've heard of similar delays. And so increasing the number of these mental health teams would also really help folks who are unsheltered get the care that they need. Another model that we know works is the Housing First model. It's an evidence-based approach that also eliminates the bureaucratic barriers and preconditions to housing, and really uses a person-centered approach to get people into housing with supportive services, which we also just call supportive housing. So that type of housing is permanent housing for people, and there are supportive services for someone, case management services that are either provided on site or they can be provided at a community location depending on the type of supportive housing. Again, this is both supportive housing and the Housing First approach are very well studied as being successful in helping folks who are chronically homeless become housed and stay housed. And part of that approach is eliminating kind of the bureaucratic barriers that exist to getting into supportive housing. So currently, if you want to get into supportive housing, there's a very long application that requires having a psychosocial report. It requires having a psychiatrist interview you, providing information. It is a long process to determine eligibility. Once you're eligible, then you have to get paired with an apartment. And we do know that there's only about one apartment for every 5 people who have an approved supportive housing application. So we simply don't have enough supportive housing. But we also know that the city hasn't been successful in even getting people who already have approved supportive housing applications into housing. So over several months last year when this was being tracked, only 18% of people who had an approved supportive housing application were actually placed in a supportive housing unit. So what we're seeing with the city's supportive housing is that they're not using this Housing First model and eliminating the bureaucratic barriers, which is limiting the number of people who are able to access supportive housing. Next slide. And despite the fact that there are all of these issues getting into supportive housing and the need is greater, there are over 5,000 vacant supportive housing units in the city as of June of this year. These are empty units that could be used to house our unsheltered neighbors if the city were to double down and really take this Housing First approach. So at the moment, there's really only one true Housing First program operating in the city, and it is a program that took vacant supportive housing units that they had and worked with the city to kind of break down the barriers and get people immediately into those units, and then do all the paperwork and all the application to actually backfill the funding for those units. So it's a model that has, it's very small at this point, but it's shown to be successful in really getting people off the streets into these units, and also by filling at some of these vacant supportive housing units. Unfortunately, the Adams administration has declined to expand on this success and do more of this. We are hoping that the next mayoral administration takes a different approach and really kind of breaks down the bureaucracy that prevents unsheltered people from being able to get into permanent supportive housing. And there are, this One Housing First program that exists is a great model for this. I will also say that the city back in 2015 was actually certified by the federal government for having ended chronic veterans homelessness, and really through a similar approach. They took units that were available, and some of those were funded by the federal government, but really the effort was understanding the needs of each chronically homeless veteran, understanding what would work for them, and then finding the units that would work. It was really just about understanding who they were working with and placing them in those units and kind of cutting out all the bureaucracy for supportive housing that exists. It was very successful, and this is a model that the next administration could really replicate, using these vacant supportive housing units to help a lot of our unsheltered neighbors get off the street and into permanent housing. So I think that's all we have, but we're happy to take questions and answers. Or take questions and answer them.
Hey, thank you so much. I think we're gonna take some questions. Jerry, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have a few, but I'll try to be super fast. What are your thoughts on the problems of owners accepting Section 8 vouchers?
So I think, are you referring to owners who are refusing to accept
Yes.
Section 8 and other, and the city has its own voucher program called City FEPS. Yeah, so that is known as source of income discrimination. It is illegal in New York City. So it's not something that owners should be engaging in. However, what we have seen is that the enforcement of that law has been insufficient. It is enforced by the city's Commission on Human Rights. And over the past few years, funding has been cut to the Commission on Human Rights, even as the number of human rights laws that they've been tasked with enforcing has grown. And quite simply, they need more budget and more attorneys to be able to enforce those laws, and actually help. They have in the past had kind of a rapid response, where if someone comes to them and reports the discrimination, they will take a rapid response and try and just get the person into that housing. But if that doesn't work, then they can enforce penalties against the landlords and housing providers who are violating that law. But there does need to be more work to ramp up that enforcement. And I think particularly against some of the very large corporate landlords who own many buildings throughout the city, doing more work to make sure that they are complying with the law.
I have a few questions. So on one of the earlier slides, you shared that over 100,000 people were in shelters in any given night in October. What is the shelter capacity in the city system, and is that number exceeding the total number of shelter beds, or is there capacity to accommodate more people?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is actually no maximum capacity in the shelter system, because in the 1980s, a homeless person filed a lawsuit against the city, saying that the state constitution provided a right to shelter. Under that litigation, which Coalition for the Homeless ended up being involved in, we became both the city and court-appointed monitors of the New York City shelter system, and that established the right to shelter in New York. So if people show up to shelter intake, particularly single adults, if they show up to the intake, then the city has to provide them with a bed. So both us and DHS and DHS, I'm referring to the Department of Homeless Services in New York City, are constantly monitoring the number of people seeking shelter and the capacity, and maintaining enough of vacancy so that people do have the right to shelter. And to be frank, this is the reason why New York City doesn't look like LA or San Francisco or other cities in the United States, where there are huge encampments of people who are homeless. We just don't, and that's not to say that we don't have, too many people who are unsheltered in New York City. We do, but New York City would look very, very different without the right to shelter, because that litigation and the ongoing requirement requires the city to make sure that there is enough capacity for people who want shelter.
Somebody else wants to throw you Sandra.
Yeah, you were raising the issue about the AMIs and what's considered, middle income and so on, right? That there's, and many of those units, the few that are being built are often made available to the higher end renters. And I'm wondering who is contesting that and where is that being contested? Do you folks do it? How is that? Because it's being, certainly in the city of Yes, housing, that was a major issue. So how is that being addressed? And who's doing that?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, this is a city choice of how they want to spend their dollars. And, as you saw from the slides, they have made the choice to create affordable housing for more higher income families than they have for the lowest income families. And that is what we are working on, is trying to get the next administration to commit to switching that paradigm and really focusing our city dollars and our city housing production on the people who need it most, instead of the higher income households. And what we do think is that if you focus on the bottom, then it will actually decrease competition for higher rent housing for the people who have marginally higher incomes than that. It has kind of a stacking effect. You mentioned City of Yes. The universal affordability preference in City of Yes requires to take advantage of that and get the building density bonus, that the units be offered at 80% AMI or less. So they're not quite those highest units, but they are still kind of in the middle income there. So our expectation is not that City of Yes is going to really impact the real need for people who are sleeping in shelters tonight, because most of those people are not at 80% AMI. They are at 30% AMI or less, and that is why they are in the shelter system.
Like I said, when you said the city makes that decision, who in the city makes that decision?
The mayor.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the mayor, his agencies, city council does have some influence because they negotiate the budget with the mayor every year, although the mayor has more power in our city budget process. But they could play a role in trying to make sure that the capital dollars, because this is the city's capital budget that goes into producing affordable housing, city council could play a role in making sure that those capital dollars are being used for the lowest income households. But I think in this situation, the mayor has more control over anyone else. And what we have seen is that almost every past administration has set out this really big goal, and they say, we want to produce 100,000 affordable housing units. We want to produce 50,000, 200,000. They throw out these big goals, but the fact is that to build affordable housing for lower income households requires more money. And so you can't reach those big production numbers if you're actually building for the people who need it most. You're going to build ultimately a smaller amount of housing, but you'll be targeting it for the people who are in shelter, which is expensive in and of itself. And so what happens is, just to meet their big goals that they have set out, they end up building at these higher incomes because it means there's less city subsidy needed to build those units. So it's a trade-off, and we are really just hoping that the next mayor decides not to trade off building affordable housing for people who are making six figures so they can hit this big unit count goal. Instead, really think about investing the city's dollars where they are needed the most.
I have a question in that same vein. So on one of the slides, you showed that um, 65% of renters are in threat of being rent burdened, or they spend more than 30% of their income on rent. Does that mean that 65% of all new affordable units in the future should meet that demand?
No, not quite that many. So that number, 65% of renters being rent burdened, does mean that there are that many people who are going to be struggling in some way to make ends meet, right? But some of them may be in housing that they have some protections around. They might be in rent stabilized housing, so they're not necessarily going to see huge rent jumps. That doesn't mean that some of those people aren't at risk of entering shelter, but some of those families are going to be able to make ends meet. But it just shows the mismatch, though, between available apartments and what really people should be paying in rent in order to not be rent burdened. And so that's that like 7% of apartments available versus 65% of people who need apartments at that rent.
And we also see that rent burden really correlates with the income and the income status. So even though all the incomes that we saw on the screen do experience some kind of rent burden, we really see that at the lower incomes, it's something like 50+% of extremely low income households are rent burdened. And then I think it's something like 30% are severely rent burdened, which is paying more than 50% of your income. And then as we get higher and higher up to the income buckets, the rent burden significantly drops off, which we feel is another justification for investing in deeply, deeply affordable units.
Thanks.
Can I?
Just after everyone in the community. I do have one other question about supportive housing. You said that 5,000, there are currently 5,000 vacant supporting housing units that are just being sort of warehoused. Where are these supportive housing units located? And in that same frame of thought, what is being done to provide more supportive housing? And where is this supportive housing being built? Is it in mixed use buildings that have market rate affordable supportive housing? Is it standalone and that there are certain developments going up that are just supportive housing? Is it city run?
Yeah, so most supportive housing is developed by nonprofit providers. I think what we see in the city is that most of it is buildings that are 100% supportive housing units. There are some what are called scatter site supportive housing units, meaning they are just apartments that are rented by a nonprofit agency, and then a person becomes a tenant and they're living in a regular building. So we need more supportive housing. Sorry. And your question about where these units are a little more specifically, in terms of the vacant units, we've been trying to figure out more information about where these units are and why they're vacant. And Councilmember Lincoln Ressler recently passed a bill in City Council that would require the city to report more fully on these vacant units so we can have a better picture of where they are, who the providers are, and try and understand how we can better use them. We do know that some of these units need some amount of repair. They're old units that have been online for 30 years and have never had any kind of a renovation. And so that's a hurdle for them being filled. But we think also that there are other units out there that could be brought online if the city were really paying attention and saying, hey, how do we best use our housing stock that's sitting empty? In terms of bringing more online, there are commitments from both the city and the state to build more affordable housing. In 2015, New York City committed to what's called New York City 1515. So that was to build 15,000 units of supportive housing over the next 15 years. So we're now in year 11 of that commitment. But at this point, only half of the supportive housing committed there has been brought online. So we are behind schedule. And that is something that we also really want to see the next administration committing to, is actually just ramping up and getting the rest of those supportive housing units online.
Gary?
I'm going to make a comment and ask a quick question. I think that I don't know whether or not it's sort of trickled down from the federal government, but these bands of middle, moderate, certainly in the city, allow for deception and obfuscation. Because you're saying to the public, oh, we built middle-class housing, when you should be saying we built a majority for people who have incomes of over 300,000. And as follows. So I would really urge everybody to try and claim those numbers with greater accuracy. And so the follow-up question, which you sort of anticipated, is have you either directly or secondhand gotten the incoming administration to comment on their interpretation of the two things you brought up, which is right to shelter and involuntary commitment?
Oh, we have not yet, but we are looking forward to having those conversations with the new administration. It is definitely a recommendation that we have been very public about and communicated privately. And we, really look forward to talking to the next administration about how we can really address these issues, these really fundamental issues, and how they can take approaches that are different than previous administrations.
So neither came up during the campaign debates or statements?
Well, so I think Mayor-elect Mamdani's housing plan has some commitments to building 200,000 units of affordable housing. It doesn't specifically delve into income bands. It does mention more funding for 2 HPD development programs that do reach deeper affordability. Still not the lowest affordability, but they're at 50% or 68% AMI or less. So his housing plan does call for more funding for those programs. But without specific commitments on how much funding. And so that's really what we're looking forward to discussing with the new administration.
Thank you.
Any other questions for members of the committee? Then I'll open it up to the public.
Thank you. So I had a question, about, so the current administration last week, and I'm talking about federal level Trump administration, just to be clear.
Sure.
Announced that they're gonna cut funding for permanent housing. How is that gonna affect, New York City?
Yeah, I think this is potentially devastating in a lot of ways. So the exact change is a change in the way that the federal government funds supportive housing. And the change is that, one, they are no longer prioritizing permanent supportive housing, which like part of the supportive housing model has always been that it is permanent. And they are switching to fund mostly, or to devote most of the funding through what is called the continuum of care, 70% of it to transitional housing that has a 2-year time limit. That is devastating because we do know, especially in New York City, that there is not affordable rents for people to move out of transitional housing and onto. Like, great that you can be housed for 2 years, but at the end of those 2 years, even if you're, very stable in your life, even if you're working, trying to find housing at rent that you can afford is incredibly difficult. And frankly, by then kicking people out of housing after 2 years, we're just wasting money. We're wasting that 2 years of funding because people will enter the shelter system. This could impact up to 8,500 units of supportive housing that are either partially or completely funded by the federal government. And it's a little unclear on how big that impact will be, but we do know that there will be a significant number of units that are losing funding from the federal government as they just switch the way that they're funding. Another issue just to flag in the new funding opportunity through the continuum of care is that proposals are scored based on whether the jurisdiction or whether the program acknowledges that gender is a binary, and whether they have any kind of like DEI efforts. And so it will be harder for any programs that, you know, do not follow those, identity requirements that the federal government is pushing to receive funding in the future. So that will be, hard for some existing LGBTQI programs that are serving folks who are gender nonconforming, to continue to receive funding under the new funding priorities.
Great, thank you. I think we have two additional questions. Julia?
Sorry, a question just came to my mind. So, will they permanent supportive housing just for the homeless or the extremely low income residents have some side effects? Like not only the homeless people want the permanent housing, like the middle income people also want the permanent housing. Like if I become homeless, I will have better chances to get a permanent housing. So why do I need to work? I want to be the homeless, and then the city will provide me with the permanent housing. So I don't need to work, right? Like more and more people want to become homeless and get the permanent housing.
Yeah, so I think the folks who are eligible for permanent supportive housing are people with disabilities and who are chronically homeless. So to be eligible for permanent supportive housing, you have to meet those criteria. And so you have to meet criteria of being unsheltered or in shelter for a long period of time, which is not something that people choose to do. Living in shelters is not a pleasant experience, or being unsheltered is not a pleasant experience. And then you have to have a disability that is either a physical disability or a mental health disability. And that is who permanent housing is designed for. So these are folks who have a really high level of need because of these intersecting factors. And that is why permanent supportive housing, which again has been researched over decades, has been very successful in helping people permanently end homelessness and find stability in their lives.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
Yeah. Jerry?
I just wanted to add, and you just implicitly did, that this attack on DEI includes everything associated with the disability community and accessibility.
Yes, it does.
And I think that speaks, that's particularly the hardest part right here, because we do see that supportive housing does help some of the most marginalized individuals. And we see that supportive housing helps some of the people who need housing and the support the most. And when we really talk about supporting from the bottom up, what we're seeing is this policy change is almost like chopping from the bottom down. From the bottom up, I should say. And it really is kind of like attacking those who need it the most, such as people who are disabled, people who don't, people who are LGBTQ, and people who do live on the margins, not even amongst homeless individuals, but people who live even further amongst the margins amongst homeless people.
Sorry, clarification.
Sure, one more question.
Sorry, one more. You mentioned that there are about 8,500 units that are partially or fully funded by the federal government. I think you mentioned the number before, but out of how many in New York City?
New York City has 42,000 supportive housing units. So it's a significant portion.
Thank you.
And those units are funded both by state dollars, the city dollars, and federal dollars, with different configurations depending on the unit. It's actually, the funding is quite complicated.
As everything else
Yeah.
in New York.
Yes.
So when you gave the figure of 5,000 were not being used, that's a 5,000 out of the 42,000 that
Yes.
exist? Okay.
Yes.
What was your question? Sorry, 5,000?
Like you said, the 5,000 that you mentioned, which are left empty, was that in the context of the 42,000 that exist?
Great. Any additional questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you both so much. We really appreciate you being here this evening to talk with us. This was really informative. I can say on my behalf that I learned a lot of eye-opening information tonight, so. We appreciate this, and if you don't mind sharing this presentation with us afterwards, so we can share it online and circulate it around to other members of the committee and the community who were not able to attend tonight, that would be really, really great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
I'll go ahead and
Thank you so
send that
much for
out.
having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care. Thanks. Okay. That was really great. I learned a lot, and that was very eye-opening information. So we're looking forward to receiving the presentation, and we'll, Brian, I imagine will post it on the community board's website. Great.
Wouldn't that be part of our, just the meeting, like,
I'm sorry?
we video the meeting, we tape the meeting, so
Yes,
isn't that
yes, yes.
just part of it
Yeah.
anyhow?
Implicitly, yeah.
Yes.
Implicitly, okay.
But, I mean, the presentation will be available for people who want to follow it.
Okay.
But yeah, as you mentioned, the recording is also
It
available.
will be there, okay.
Yeah,
I-
so the-
Because there was a lot of great information.
There was, yeah.
That I couldn't,
I know, it was hard,
Didn't catch up,
yeah,
yeah.
and I think it also segues perfectly into the next agenda item, which has to do with the housing work that we've been
Yeah,
doing,
yeah.
Sandra, so, I guess a little update for members of the committee and the community. Earlier this month, I believe it was, we met with Community Board 7.
Yeah.
And they've demonstrated a real significant interest in working with us to, study and to analyze some of the housing data that we're trying to get, so we divided up the work, so to speak, between our two community boards, and we're going to do some research into it as much as possible. Sandra, if you'd like to talk about the work that you're
Yeah.
doing with data?
Actually, I think we started this last spring, we got about the issue being, it was the issue of, how much affordable housing was being built, who was it being built for? What does it look like in our neighborhood? What's the distribution of affordable units, or really what's the distribution in our neighborhood in general of apartments, the kinds of apartments? And so we began to design our own study of what was the diversity of housing in our district, with the idea of being able to then discuss and I would say advocate for affordable housing as these decisions are being made. I think it was last spring that the City of Yes Housing came up, wasn't it? And that's a very important document. I would say we should all take a look at it, actually. I don't know what when we first did it, it was almost impossible to read, but I think in order to understand what's happening in the city in terms of development of housing and quote affordable housing, you need to read that document to get an idea of it. And she did a great job. They both did a great job today of explaining what does exist and what doesn't, and using the AMI, the HUD AMI, which really does not reflect actually what renters in particular, we can talk about what their incomes look like. But so we want to know the picture of what our community looks like. And I know you had the slide, we could take a
I
look.
think Brian,
Yeah,
This was sort of the logic of it was we would like to have data. We want to have database positions on these issues rather than our own, our own views of it. We want to know what actually this is, again, as they were doing in this presentation. So they already they know there are 5,000 empty apartments.
Right.
I want to know where they got the data from.
right.
And as you're looking, what is their sources? Because we need that data. And we know that, an example, rent stabilized apartments are being left empty in our community. We want to know how many of them are empty, right? Again, concrete data, so that we can be, we can really join this discussion in a reasonable way. So, so we started this, and we then reached out to other community boards, because, the more there are, the better, the more we have support and we're working together, the more impact we have. I have to say, because I'm so stuck on the issue that it's the mayor that decides, the distribution, like CDS. That was a shock. But it's a very useful shock in terms of a new administration and our being part of that discussion in terms of the kind of units that would be developed. So again, I would love more information. I would love to know more about What do you mean the mayor?
The org chart is public.
The what?
The org chart for the upper reaches of the government, and you can see
Okay,
who reports mayor and each of the heads or acting heads,
Right,
and then you can build a strategy around that.
right.
so it would be great to,
Can
yeah,
I comment?
Sure,
I mean,
yeah, of course.
Based on my experience
Yeah.
in building affordable housing, basically, it's driven by the subsidies that are available.
Mhm.
The capital subsidies
Yeah.
and the rental subsidies.
Mhm,
And so you've got HPD and you've got DHCR, the state.
mhm.
And in their programs, they're gonna tell you what to build.
Mhm.
So if they want you to serve formerly homeless, they're gonna offer you this much capital subsidy per unit. And if they want you to build for 60%, usually the cutoff is 60% at HPD for the really good subsidies. In other words, as an affordable housing developer, you'd probably stay at 60%, maybe a few at 80. But most affordable housing is built by the private sector. And so you really have to give them the incentives. And that's why the subsidies go so high in the AMI range. Because these guys don't wanna be bothered with 60%. So, you know, what they'll do is they'll partner with a not-for-profit. And they'll give 30% of the units in the building to not-for-profit to serve 60 and below. And then the rest of the building is for them and it makes a profit. And also, you really have to understand that to run a building, you can't run a building on the rents of 60% of AMI.
Mhm.
The expenses just won't justify it.
Mhm.
So you need to mix it up, you know, no matter what. And of course, the rental subsidies, I mean, the section 8s are very generous. I mean, well, they used to be anyhow, you know, because you can't take somebody at 30% or 60% without a rental subsidy. You know, you just can't do it.
I guess the issue will be, and I think, again, Ms. Moore's making a very good point of how that gets worked out. There's only the government's, there's a limited amount of funding. And they're going to distribute it in particular ways in terms of which kind of housing. I think what it leaves for us is in our advocacy, where do we have any strength to advocate? And
Right.
that's a real question.
Yeah.
And I would love to have, you know, somebody really knowledgeable about that to help us understand where we have a role and points we'll take it. It's as if it's already been decided in concrete and, you know, sort of practical ways. But there's gotta be other voices, other ways of, you know, generating funding in order to develop actual, you know,
Mhm.
housing for people who are making 30%, and it's a lot of rent in the terms of the rental world, it's a lot of people in that category.
Yeah, you
So-
have to incentivize the development.
Yeah.
That is the bottom line.
Mhm.
And the other big issue is land, you know? They're not making any more. And,
Right.
Well, I think from the point of view of the community board, what's our voice in this, right? I mean, lots of things seem to be given. Do we have a voice? And I think those are fair questions as we begin to want to advocate. Is there in fact, is there a place for us? So who do we get? I don't know who we get as a speaker to help us understand a bit more of this.
A bit more of what?
Where do we have where can we say we want to advocate for a greater percentage of a percentage of apartments available
Okay.
at that 30% or less,
Okay.
because the fact that reflects bottom of
For.
and the issues that's being raised is, you know, they're very nuanced discussions
Mhm.
in terms of the sources of funding, the deals that have to be made.
Mhm.
So we may believe something, but do we
Right.
actually have a voice in this discussion? And what kind of voice?
Right.
Who would help us with?
I'm not sure. I mean, as a community board, we speak through sort of resolutions, right? The resolutions that we pass and the resolutions that we vote on. That's kind of how we communicate to the city agencies and the city
But
government.
we're also directly speaking
Yeah,
with
we
their
Yeah.
representatives, and that is the
That's a fine.
artifact,
Right,
right?
Right.
Deliverable.
right.
But the conversations that are triggered by the resolution
Mhm.
might be, do you think I have enough to take this before the city
Sure,
council?
Right.
Or to the governor?
Mhm.
What can you add? Where are your sources? I
Right.
think as we
Right.
have a spate of people incoming and running,
Mhm.
some as of today filing their paperwork,
Sure.
we have ammunition to leverage them.
Right.
To certainly get on the record. That's what I was asking them,
Mhm.
because I had a couple conversations with Zaron about supporting the racial equity lawsuit that has been filed against Eric Adams months ago. And he agreed with me, but he wouldn't go on the record before January 1st. And it is important that at the minimum that, once we have an administration that is holding power, that we know what they think about
Right.
involuntary servitude, right to
Mhm.
shelter, et cetera, that there should be a checklist. And I asked about that, that it speaks poorly of our media and the debates that these questions actually weren't asked during the cycle.
Mhm.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. And to that point, we don't just pass resolutions without having an understanding of these issues at hand, right? So we would need to do the work and to understand better what we would be advocating for as a community board before we would
Right.
do that.
right.
So I guess to answer your question, Sandra, that I'm sure there's somebody out there that we can
I
contact.
really wanna know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, God, it just, there's so much we don't know, right? Who-
Yeah.
BH, would somebody H?
Well, I guess
Safety
maybe we
doesn't
can,
seem
maybe
right.
Brian and you and I can work
Okay.
together with some sort of emails and try to understand what we want from which speakers and
Yeah.
maybe try to get some. And I know Jerry also has a lot of connections that would be really
Yeah.
useful as well.
Well, and one thing I don't want to forget, and I'm opening my mouth, is it just so happened as I had the radio on today that Allison Stewart was circling back to the last of the ballot initiatives which passed, which is like for a unified, standardized city map, whatever that is. And she had my friend Noel on, and I was actually back channeling him. Because I said our friend Wendy created green maps around the world, and that this map should be something which is a dashboard that you can call up information as you see fit. Most
Mhm.
people think just of like physical buildings or transportation, but it can be everything, including people self-identifying or querying, is my building rent stabilized? Because that is one of the big questions in New York. But there are many ways that with this map, and he had a professor on as well, where we could contribute to another dimension of what should be in this map.
I mean, there are some maps available out there on city planning's website, for example, there's Zola, which I use pretty much daily. City map is sort of the street map, if you will, where it just delineates.
Well,
streets
the
and
point
things.
is not stopping, because everybody's like, they had a call in to one of the problems that we addressed, which is like about when you're dealing with a superstructure like Grand Central
Mhm.
and the complexity of like not drilling into utilities and whatnot, and how people are still bringing their paper maps down,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And to what extent can we knit all that information? Because some information is deliberately not digitized so that people maintain their power, right? So how do we force that issue and take a basically unsexy issue, but make it into one of access?
Yeah. Well, we should go back to, you folks are also in sort of, haven't been around as we
Right.
went through this last year, so you don't know why we have a certain, passion, determination about doing this, and hope to be able to have some part in the discussion of what's, the development that's really gonna be coming down on us. Maybe we should just, I think I'm not gonna go into this at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
but
this
I
may
just
be
want-
maybe
yeah.
a summary.
It isn't too much detail, but the on the positive note, as opposed to, we're helpless and nobody will notice us. We did get in touch with an organization called Beta. And the reason we contacted Beta is, we were interested in rent stabilized is one important issue, and the disappearance of rent stabilized apartments. It's an issue here in our community, it's an issue all over the city. And so we wanted to know where the rent stabilized apartments were here and what was happening to them. Yes,
So we just mentioned to have a very comprehensive map for the city, but I know that on DHCR's website, you can search if your unit or if your apartment
Yes.
is rent stabilized.
that's right.
Yeah, it is registered, but like if you want something to have all the information, it's gonna require a very intense cooperation between the city and the state, and it can be
That's right.
a very bureaucratic block to combine all this information, and it will take years and years to
Well,
complete this.
right.
process.
Hopefully not too many.
Well, there is, so what, but Beta did, up till 2014, they mapped it, right? They mapped the building with the number of apartments. And that was amazing. But they didn't do it after that. So we got in touch with Beta because they do data analysis for the public good. I did finally, went back and said, oh, I love that. And they're gonna work with us on getting us, where are the sources for this information, right? You said DHCR, right? That's a horrifying idea of going apartment by apartment. Not city, but the Rent Stabilization Board has data, but they don't have it the way we want it, and then whatever. But so Beta will work with us. It's like the little godsend I could be, I'm living on hope. But, so they said we have a list. I'm not gonna go through the list of what we thought would be the kinds of apartments in our district. They're gonna go through the list and sort of refine it. Then they're gonna get the sources for us. Now, the next thing is having them do the
work.
Exactly,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
that's what we want.
That might be
Oh my God.
you and me effort maybe, but one step at a time, and
Yeah.
at least there's positive
I just wrote
movement
down,
and development.
The point about them is they also have community outreach to get the community folks themselves involved in doing the data analysis that would be relevant to the questions that they have, right, which I think is a very important issue in terms of wherever, whether it's resolutions or something else, that community people themselves can have a voice in this discussion about what kinds of affordability exists. And they're totally dedicated to it. So maybe we should put that on our website or something. Just go to the Betas, BETA,
Yeah.
go to their website and see what they're doing. And the kinds of, they're often having meetings and so on. And you just get an idea of what they're into, and they're, really dedicated to housing.
Maybe we can share the link around.
Maybe they come
Yeah,
talk
and-
to us.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
I think Jerry,
Spoke to him today.
Yeah.
I spoke to the founder today.
Okay, well, let me continue with this, because
Sure.
I have said the thing.
Oh,
up,
yeah,
and I-
yeah.
Let's not do it, so
No
it's all over the
Um,
place.
We could definitely in the spring help them publicize their open data week, which they host and which all like civic tech
Yeah,
nonprofits.
it's great.
Yeah.
It's just like a great voice.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just all I'm gonna say. Okay,
great. So there's a lot of good movement happening in this regard, and
and we'll fit you folks in. I feel bad, because I think,
yeah,
if you have questions, because, we're sort of taking a history with us, but we're not really sharing it with you.
right.
Yeah,
And if you want to learn more, get involved, feel free to reach out to myself or Sandra, to Brian, and we're more than happy to connect you. There's been a lot of, as you heard, there's been a long history in just the past year, a little bit more than a year. So it's been tough to keep up with, but we're making good progress. But I see that somebody has their hand raised, Brian. Mario?
yes, Mario Messina.
Sure.
Mario, I'll promote you to panelist.
Or you can just. Put your own.
Hi, Mario, you have the floor. If you have a question for the committee, feel free to ask.
Mario, if you could just unmute.
Maybe not.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm the president of the Rose Hill Initiative X 29th Street Neighbor Association. And thank you very much for this presentation. Is very interesting. I have a couple of questions and a wish in a certain way. First of all, I would like to know who has commissioned the study that we have seen tonight. Second of all, who has seen it and what are the intentions of the study? Third of all, I think that the idea of putting together a resolution to try to promote some action based on the study is a wonderful idea. But I think that we cannot and we should not stop there. We need to hold the new elected officials accountable for actions and for needs, for things that needs to be done. That's it. That's all I have to say. And the ball is in your court. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
So to answer your first question, nobody commissioned this study. It is entirely out of this committee's sort of collected agreement that this was an undertaking that we wanted to do. Nobody's being paid to do this, and we are not paying anyone to do this. This is entirely on our own. The goal of this is, as Sandra mentioned before, to get more information, to have a better understanding of housing, affordable housing, and other kinds of housing that exists in our community. And we hope to use that information to guide us in the future and to make more informed decisions going forward. With regard to your last point about a resolution, I think that you heard from many members of the committee that we're kind of in agreement that we need to hold a lot of elected officials and representatives accountable. And I think there's also a lot of information that we would like to learn, and we have a lot of questions for them. And we intend for those to guide us in our decision-making going forward.
Wonderful. I really appreciate it. I sympathize with what you're saying and count us in. Whatever we can do to help in order to resolve the status quo that has been going on, not for years, but for decades, we'll be more than happy to put our weight behind it.
What organization, you said it was a group, but I missed what.
We used to be called the 29th Street Neighbor Association, and we just rebranded into the Rose Hill Initiative because of the area that we are covering.
The Rose Hill Initiative.
That's correct, yes.
Technically there, yeah.
Where is it?
Like 29th and Lex.
Yeah, just remember.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Appreciate your questions.
No, thank you. I mean, and I appreciate your work and your help in all of this. And again, happy to be of help.
Great, thank you. Any further questions from the public or the committee?
I can just, sorry, I just quickly Googled. And I found some good data, but it's by, not community board district, but rather, city council district.
Okay.
So I found some good data district four, it's called NYC Housing Tracker.
Okay.
And it lists actually everything that we spoke about.
Okay.
Wait, what is it called? You just.
NYC Housing Tracker.
NYC Housing.
Unfortunately, the council districts don't align with the community district. And
Yeah.
we do have two council, maybe three that overlap with us, so. Maybe two, I'm not sure, two, yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, that was helpful, thank you.
Say Betas?
Beta, BETA?
Oh, is that it?
Data NYC.
So with that, moving on, thank you, Sandra, for the
Oh, you're welcome.
summary. So the chair's report. I have some news to share in that we have a community planning fellow joining us this evening, Natalie to my right. She's gonna be working on a really important study for this community district, and you're gonna be working with us this fall and winter and spring, and she will present her findings to the board in April. So if you don't mind sharing sort of your background and what you're gonna do for us.
So hi everyone, my name is Natalie. I am from Fordham University. I'm obtaining my master's in social work in May. And part of my research project, I am with the organization called Fund the City of New York. And we're basically research-urban planning. And my focus for this project is focusing on senior needs or senior housing. And I would love for anybody who has input, because I'm not from this community, to give me as many resources or information that you have on what you think the senior needs of this community, what is needed in the community for that specific population, and what does accessibility look like, and all those kind of things.
Great. So if you have any suggestions or recommendations or potential contacts to help her with this project, feel free to reach out to me and
Yeah.
we can loop her in. Yeah, we're really excited to have you.
Thank you. Looking forward to pass some resolutions.
Yes, yeah. And I will say that this project was inspired by our community district needs statement, where we identified supportive senior housing is one of the top needs for fiscal year 2027. So this is going to perfectly tie into our needs as a community. So we're really happy to work with you and to see the product in the spring.
Yes, any information you have?
Is it about, needs in general, but senior housing and the needs of seniors relative
Yes.
to that housing?
Yeah, so anything
Right.
related to seniors, what you would like for
Okay.
this population.
Right.
Specifically, I know housing is one of the biggest ones that you guys want to focus on, but it's not only about housing. They may have other needs that we can also cover, because all of these things intersect with each
Right.
other, so.
And can we get then, like an email contact for you, so we
Yeah.
so how would we do that?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, if you want to funnel things through me and
Okay, that's
I
fine.
can loop her
We can
in
do that,
as
it's fine.
needed or
Yeah.
even direct you to Natalie, but
Yeah, I can share my email.
sure.
Yeah,
if
you
feel
feel
comfortable
comfortable,
doing
okay.
so, yeah. Great, thank you. That's it for the chair's report, old and new business. Anyone have any old or new business? No, I don't. Okay, great. All right, perfect. So with that, we don't need to take a vote because we're not voting on anything this evening. But if there are no objections, we will adjourn the meeting at 8 o'clock exactly. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, Kyle.
Good night, Kyle.
Yeah.